Hello, Starseeds, and welcome to the next and final episode of Sacred Soma Storytime Serenade. This is the final story time from this epic trilogy series based on the fact that those who tell the stories rule the world. And this is to quote our good friend, Terence McKenna. To hear my previous story times about great lovers, you can hear me tell tales of Eros and Psyche, as well as Orpheus and Eurydice, in the links that I will provide in the below description. Yesterday was the Summer Solstice, and so what divine timing it is to tell the story of Venus and Adonis in the echo of the honey full moon just a week ago. The fact that the honeymoon is just a week before Adonis makes his return is no coincidence. And you know, Starseeds, that I do not subscribe to coincidences. Venus, also known as Aphrodite, is the goddess of love and beauty, and she has been a favorite goddess of mine for quite some time. She rules the astrological signs of both Taurus and Libra, as well as aligned with other great wife and mother goddesses around the world. Unfortunately, Venus does have aspects of jealousy, which we all know about because of the way that she punished Psyche because of jealousy, as well as the fact that she's not necessarily a faithful wife at all times. The classical tale of Venus and Adonis, told by even the great William Shakespeare, downplays the importance of Adonis, who is symbolically a sun god that has much in common with the Osiris myth. Adonis' death was one that was meant to be a punishment for Venus, as every man and god desired her. To have her fully devoted to Adonis was something that caused the ire of Venus's former lover, Ares. So, without getting into spoilers, let me begin the story. So this is just going to be my recounting of the Venus and Adonis tale. There are many versions from Ovid's Metamorphoses to William Shakespeare's version. So this is going to be a collation of those different tales into one story time. Adonis was born from a myrrh tree. This came to be because Adonis's mother was actually cursed to love and be completely infatuated with her own father. And this curse was actually created by Venus herself. In many cases, Adonis's mother was one of the 7 sisters of the Pleiades. The significance of the myrrh tree in myth is one that can be talked about in another story time and another time. The reason behind the curse was not actually to punish Adonis's mother, it was actually to punish Adonis's mother's father. Simera, who was Adonis's mother, her father and mother thought of themselves as higher than the gods. And the gods have this thing about being a little bit too haughty and having too much hubris about your own achievements in this world. So Simera, who is Adonis's mother, her parents were actually very, very in love with the fact that they were in love with each other. And they used to call themselves Zeus and Hera, which the gods did not like at all. Venus went ahead and cursed Simera, who was Adonis's mother, and she was so in lust with her father that in the night she went in and they had an affair. And from that point, the father was very upset and tried to actually kill Simera. Simera took off. And due to the fact that Simera, in fact, was an innocent, even though she was cursed by Venus, she, in fact, had done nothing really wrong. It was not her who had roused the ire of the gods, so to speak. And so, as such, Zeus and the upper gods of the pantheon took pity on Simera as she was fleeing her father trying to stab her, and they turned her into a myrrh tree. Now, the myrrh tree was split by lightning, and what appeared in the split of that tree was actually Adonis himself. When Adonis was born, Venus immediately fell in love with the beautiful boy. She gave Adonis to Persephone, the goddess of the underworld, to take care of until the boy would come of age. Now, unfortunately for Venus and all of the other women of this planet, everyone would fall in love with Adonis. So when Adonis was finished growing up, lo and behold, Persephone was not willing to give him up. Of course, the gods always had a way of dealing with such disputes, and they got Zeus to step in again. Zeus decreed that Adonis would spend 4 months of the year in the underworld with Persephone, and he would spend 4 months of the year with Venus. And then he could spend the remaining 4 months of the year with whomever goddess that he decided. And of course, Venus was the one that he chose. No questions asked. That being said, going back here, I just want to preface the fact that the ancient Greeks of antiquity actually did not subscribe to winter being an official season. Winter was seen as an absence of energy. And so the 4 months of the year being split up 3 ways was actually because the Greeks only recognized spring, summer, and autumn. Adonis is so significant to the summer solstice precisely because of the decree by Zeus. Now, this is only one part of the Venus and Adonis myth. Back in ancient times, this was a time for celebration, for libations, for celebration of the sun and fertility. I am now going to get into part 2 of the Venus and Adonis myth, and it gets a little bit more tragic from here on, but as mentioned in previous Storytime Serenades, we have control over how this story plays out. Due to the fact that Adonis is now spending 8 months, more than half the year, with Venus, Venus decides to actually come down from Mount Olympus and start spending all of her time with Adonis. She starts hanging out in the woods with him, going hunting with him, because it's good to reiterate here that Adonis is also known as a great hunter. But for the purposes of this tale, Adonis is also known as a great hunter. Before Adonis goes on what will be known as his final hunting trip, Venus tells him a tale of Atlanta and Hippopotamus. You may know this tale as Atlanta and the Golden Apples. It is the tale where Hippopotamus asks for Venus's help to win over Atlanta's hand. Atlanta is a girl who basically says that if anyone can beat her in a race, she'll marry him. But if you do not beat her in a race, she will execute you. And so Hippopotamus, being in love with her, did not want to be executed and asked for Venus's help to win that race using the golden apples. I will do a separate story time about that particular story at a later time. But for now, what's good to note is the fact that after Hippopotamus and Atlanta got together, they actually ended up falling in love after Hippopotamus won the race. They didn't light incense, nor did they thank Venus for anything that she had done to bring them love into their life. And as a result, she transformed the both of them into lions. This is important because Venus warns Adonis before he goes out on this hunting trip to be careful of animals, because you don't know, especially with those large animals such as lions and tigers and boars and snakes and bulls, you don't know if there's a divine being that's being held within the avatar of that animal. And as such, Venus warned Adonis to be very careful about going hunting because, you don't know what you might be coming across. Adonis, being Adonis and being very much confident of his hunting abilities, tells Venus, I am not content to stay just hunting fluffy little white animals. I need a challenge. I need something that will inspire me to push myself harder. This, of course, stresses Venus out, but regardless, she lets him go. This tragic hunting trip, there are a few accounts of how Adonis actually is killed. The first being, and the one that I'm more likely to think is what happened, is the fact that Ares, being that he was a former lover of Venus, transforms himself into a boar and he ends up killing Adonis in the hunting trip with one of his tusks, even though Adonis ends up spearing him with an arrow. Another account is it's actually Artemis who kills Adonis due to the fact that he is such a great hunter. And this is kind of in line with Orion as well, that it's too much hunting for the particular woods. And so Artemis kills him as a result. Another telling of the tale that it's actually Apollo who does it. Regardless, it ends up being a type of divine intervention that ends up killing Adonis. Quite so because Adonis's death is symbolic of the seasonal change as well as an honoring of the cycles of life. And so, not to say that we're all stuck in fate, but this whole process of death and rebirth is one that cannot be escaped. Once Adonis is killed, regardless of the method by which it happens, his blood spills all over the forest floor, and Venus comes running as soon as she hears Adonis's screams. And when she gets there, she sees that the blood is soaked through the soil around Adonis's body, and red roses have now sprung up as a forever symbol of that tragic love. So I hope you enjoyed that telling of the Venus and Adonis myth. It doesn't necessarily have the happiest of endings. However, I just wanted to, this isn't necessarily the end of the story, because as you can tell from this story, that Adonis's death was one that was meant to be a punishment for Venus. And if we loop back around to the beginning of the story where we talked about the curse that was set upon Simera, which was Adonis's mother, that curse was not necessarily one that was done in good faith. And so there is an element of karma that comes along with these story times. Venus was basically punished for that curse that she sent upon Simera, because Simera was an innocent. She didn't necessarily deserve that curse that was bestowed upon her own parents. She had to carry the pain of that curse and bore a beautiful child as a result of it. That child became Adonis, and his death caused the grief of all of the goddesses and Venus herself. Lamentations of the women is something that is also known as a ritualistic aspect towards masculine rising. So when we think of summer solstice and the idea of Adonis coming back, us as women have a responsibility to honor and observe that. The next phase, or I would say the next part of this story, is probably the Isis and Osiris myth, where Isis takes all of the pieces of Osiris and puts them back together along with her sister. In Venus and Adonis, this particular version of the story ends with the tragic death of Adonis and the fact that we end up with red roses as a symbol of love. Now, I don't think that that is necessarily the end of the story. And so I will probably continue this story with the Isis and Osiris myth, but that is a big story and deserves a whole presentation all on its own about it. So for now, I hope you enjoyed this story time about Venus and Adonis and how red roses came to be, as well as how generational curses can transcend through with karma. Stories have a way of balancing things out because, as you can see, things that happen and actions that happen in certain times have echoes across different storylines, and depending on what things that you choose to internalize. And so, Starseeds, with that, I leave you with the final installation of our love story trilogy for Sacred Soma Storytime Serenade. Please subscribe to stay tuned for our additional content that we'll be putting up. We're also going to be putting a lot more content up on our locals group called the Warrior Class, and you can join that for a very nominal subscription fee. Of course, then, everyone, Starseeds, have a great summer solstice, and I look forward to talking to you all next time. Until then, have a beautiful one.